Hey, friends, it's your intrepid warrior, David Land, Julie, on the Leadership Deep Dive. And I've got a special guest for you today. Her name is Christy Pretzinger. And she's got something going on now that I think you guys will like. It's called the Better Leader Project. Hey, welcome, Christy. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for
And
having me, David.
Oh, my pleasure. We're going to talk about something today that is near and dear to my heart and also to Christy's heart. The topic's going to be on better, not perfect. But before we get there, let me share a little bit about Christy. She's the founder of this Better Leader Project. I'm sure she'll share a little bit more of what's going on there, where she helps leaders deal with, among other things, perfectionism. A la, here we are. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Better Not Perfect. And prior to her founding the Better Leader Project, she built her first company, WG Content, from a modest freelance writing business into a nationally recognized healthcare content consultancy. A strong believer in work life balance, Christy makes time for fun. Oh, thank God for that, Christy. We all need a little bit more fun in our lives. She enjoys traveling to faraway places, working on her golf game. Well, we could get into the perfectionism of golf. That might be a
Oh,
good
Lord.
place to start. Oh, Lord. And staying fit by exercising and hiking. A lifelong learner, she also dabbles in calligraphy, drawing, and learning new language. Quite the creative we have with us here. And Christy and her partner Pete have three adult children between them. They frequently wonder what possessed them to own four dogs who are always underfoot. Welcome, welcome,
Indeed, they
Christy.
are. And
Well, you
they're
can't have a
big.
perfect life with dogs and children underfoot, that's for sure.
It's
But
true.
you try to
Yeah,
design.
a perfect life is, not what you want anyway.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, this tendency toward perfectionism runs rampant in certain cultures, organizational cultures. It's a personal we call it a saboteur.
Hmm.
Perfectionism. It's a way we sabotage ourselves and our relationships. So I'm very aware of this. I must say, I didn't score very high on that saboteur when I took my assessment. I'm more of an experimentalist than a perfectionist, and so I'm willing to try stuff and have it fail. But what got you on this path toward writing a book about it and helping leaders with it?
Well, I just think that the world around us, the way that we are right now with social media and all of those inputs that we have, that there is this false premise of perfection being something achievable, which, if you think about it, it's not achievable. It's really not even desirable. But,
Right.
there's this whole eminence front, right? The put on of what we're like. That's not really, you get the reference. That's
I
not.
do. I remember the song.
Yes, that's not really, it's not real.
Right.
And I think that for me, I wasn't a perfectionist in the classic sense. The thing for me was really how it attacked my self worth. That I like didn't do things perfectly. I mean, I never did them perfectly, and so it was that just this self doubt that what I came to learn over time, many years, was that perfection is really a shame management strategy. Because if we're perfect, we think that the shame won't come. But of course, the irony is that the shame always comes because nobody is perfect. It's unachievable.
Right.
So that was something that I kind of came to finally after lots of rumination and many years. And I realized that while I would never be perfect, what I could be was better. And when I think about perfection, I think about it like a horizon that no matter how fast you go or how far you go, you never get any closer to it. Whereas better is simply a direction. You can always move in a direction. You're not trying to reach a particular point. And it's more, it just keeps you growing as opposed to keeping you shaming.
Yeah, I think it was one of the signature audio programs that I listened to when I got on this path of coaching and leadership development work was by Brene Brown, of course. And
Of course.
this was before her book, her first big book came out. And she had done some kind of like a retreat or workshop that had been recorded. I think it's called The Power of Vulnerability, the book that came
Hmm.
out of that work. But I think she calls perfectionism the 20-ton or 30-ton shield. Like it's a shield we put up so we don't have to be vulnerable. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the biggest thing that I realized about perfection, and I think it's actually the saddest thing about it, is that any possibility of self awareness. Because if you are operating under the premise that you have to be perfect, then by definition, you can't look at your flaws and foibles at all because you have to
Mm,
deny that they exist. And
mm.
that's a real shame because, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that work about getting to know yourself is like the most powerful. It's hard work. I think it's really hard work, but I think
Mhm.
it's the best work that we can do as human beings. You never spend any yourself, so you might as well get to know yourself. But you can't if you think you have to be perfect. You can't look at that honestly.
I think that would be um, very difficult for a stickler. Sometimes we call the perfectionist a stickler, and you
Hmm.
probably, that's kind of an old-fashioned word, and we all have experienced some stickling, people stickling us, right? The red pen comes
Hmm.
out, especially if you're
Hmm.
a writer and you grew up in the the times that you and I grew up, and you'd get your paperback and there would just be red. And
Oh
my
yeah.
both my mother and my father had red pens, so they were constantly, both pretty literate people. And I will say some of that correction was helpful in terms of writing better. And you're a writer, so there is a
Hmm.
certain um, value in getting better as a writer. So correction for the sake of getting better, but not for being perfect. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that.
correction versus criticism. They're two very different
True.
things.
I like that you say that. I do I had some authority figures in schooling, my school years, that were probably crossed that line. Not probably, they crossed that
Mm,
line between being,
yeah,
constructive um, and supportive for the sake of better and just criticizing,
yeah.
harshly. And
I think
so
we've all
there's an
had that.
impact.
Yeah, there's an
Well,
impact.
there's an impact to that, right? There's an
There
impact to
certainly
that,
is. Yeah, there
you know.
certainly is. I think it affects our self-worth. I always say that nobody gets out of childhood without bruises. The point is to find people
Right,
that will not kick you in your bruises.
right. Well,
You know.
I in some senses, I believe teachers and coaches, I'm talking about like athletic coaches
Hmm.
and public school teachers, maybe even certainly private school teachers have become better themselves in terms of how to offer feedback or uh, correction without being critical. And so I do think that, if you have a perfectionist streak in you, you have to be careful, one, for yourself, that you're not critical of yourself. This is the inner critic that, we could talk about that a
Hmm.
little bit, and some self-compassion practice, which I've spoken widely about how that has helped me in my inner voice, which was very harsh. Of course, I learned that from people I admired who were
Yeah.
harsh with me. And I was like, oh, that's the way you get better, is by being harsh and critical with yourself. Not really.
I think for me personally, I think my inner voice was harsher than most of the criticism I received. I always say that the way that we speak to ourselves, we would never address anybody else that way.
Right,
And I think that becoming conscious of that and aware of that and learning to befriend that really mean inner voice, because nobody's inner voice starts out nice. It's not like, hey, how you doing? It's always like, oh my God, look what you did. It's
right,
terrible. I mean,
right.
we just had a neighbor the other day. She's like 80. And we were all having a dinner, a neighborhood dinner, and something happened. It was
Mhm.
just kind of a joke. She was telling a story that kind of got long winded. We were kidding about it. It was no big
Mhm.
deal. And she played it off very well. She emailed the next day and was like devastated that she had done that. She just felt so bad that
Oh.
she'd gone on. And I thought, oh my gosh, we never get over it, do we? Nobody felt that
Um,
way about her, but nobody, she was just beating herself up about it. And I thought, boy,
yeah,
that's a lesson.
right. So that's another manifestation of the perfect saboteur is that
Hmm.
many of us, including myself, uh, will be harsh and critical with ourselves for making errors or what I don't even like to I don't even necessarily like to use the words mistakes or error or God forbid sin, which is what error what that word means. Except down here in the South with the evangelical Christians, it becomes a sword or a club with they hit you with. Um, so that's a topic maybe for another podcast. But to be kind and gentle with yourself when your behavior or your speech is unskillful, because you can always get more skillful.
Yeah, of
That's
course. But it's interesting when you just said that. I always think this is an interesting point that sin is also an archery term.
right. Missing the mark. Yes.
You. Yeah, I think dealing with yourself with the same kind of kindness you would share with others is, a life lesson that I think probably is never done. We all continue to work on that. I don't know. I think, unfortunately, I think as human beings, we don't seem to default to kindness to ourselves or to other people. That is something that requires your attention. You have to have an intention to actually decide to be kind. Most people aren't just by nature going to default to kindness.
Um, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I think we have it in us, um, but we also have the dark side of kindness in us, right?
Yeah.
So what I think it does, it's a choice, and um, you can see children who are being unkind with each other. My wife sees this. She teaches, second grade, and she's a very kind and
Hmm.
caring person. And so she will correct them kindly and caringly. That's
Hmm.
not really the way to treat someone else. And so hopefully, and many of us didn't get a teacher like that in life, right? I always say, like, ban recess because all the bad stuff happens at recess. The kids come back in from recess. They were doing all kinds of stuff out in the schoolyard, man. That's where all the unkindness happens, and then
Yeah,
they
but
bring
that's
it
where you
into
got
the
to learn. You got to learn how to do things.
exactly.
Yeah, you got
No,
to
I
learn,
know it.
you know?
I know. Um, but the Lord of the Flies is within us, and also though we could think about any you know pick your image of a kind and gentle person. It could be anyone, Mother Teresa or whoever, right? So that is within us, and both the light and the dark. I think
Hmm.
that's my view of it. But as you say, we have to summon that up. Uh, until it becomes a habit, then you're kind all the time. Like um, I was in a men's group this morning talking about friendship, and one of the gentlemen, you know, uh, when the discussion came around to him, he's like, let me see if I could characterize how he said it. He said, "Come from love and leave them with joy." That's how he constantly reminds himself.
I think that that is aspirational and not always possible because I
Right.
consider myself an exceedingly kind person. And
Mhm.
yet, when I get triggered, I mean, I've been in
Mhm.
meetings where I've said something regrettable, where I shut somebody down quickly.
Mhm.
That was
Mhm.
not kind, and ended up
Mhm.
having to apologize afterwards because I knew
Mhm.
the minute I said it that it was
Mhm.
wrong. And that is not
Hmm.
the way that's not the person I want to be. It's not the person I am by and large.
Right.
But I
Right.
still think that's what I mean by default, that if you get triggered,
Right.
likely you're going to say something that is going to require an apology later, and so I try to build in a practice that to avoid that, something that I call, that maybe your listeners would like, that you pause and feel what you're feeling and then anchor in your why. Who do you want to be? Like in the
Yeah.
situation that I'm talking about where I shut this person down, if I would have paused and given myself the opportunity to avoid behavior that required an apology later, then I could have chosen a better action, and
Hmm.
instead just acknowledged what she said, whatever, moved on without being dismissive to someone,
Yeah.
which was unkind. And it was really because it was just quick. I did it quickly.
Right. Right. So I like what you're saying there. It's a great example of not being perfectly kind.
Right. Not being perfect. I mean, you make mistakes.
We make mistakes. It's true.
Hmm.
We miss the mark, or we're unskillful in our speech. And one way, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, is the perfectionist, if you're really caught up in that, would never admit to having made that error because that would be a sign of imperfection. So, what are your thoughts
Right.
on that? Like, you would not go back and apologize if you're a
No.
perfectionist because you do everything
Well, I mean, I
correctly.
feel like the way you're describing, if we take it too far, perfectionism can move into sociopathy, where you like just don't think that you do anything wrong. I think the
Hmm.
difference is that a perfectionist knows they did, but they can't really acknowledge it. That's
Hmm.
where the shame comes. That's where the
Yeah.
the icky feeling comes inside. That's where the inner critic
Right.
is beating you up. But you
Right.
still can't humble yourself enough to apologize. You know what I mean? That's the pull there, is that I don't think there's a perfectionist who isn't a sociopath, like without, I mean, all kidding aside, who doesn't know when they've fallen short. I think that's the
Hmm.
angst that a perfectionist lives with,
Hmm.
but they can't look
Hmm.
at it. They just live with the angst.
What are some of the other impacts that you're noticing on ourselves or on other people or on our um, work output that the perfectionist has?
It's relentless. I mean, I know a couple people who are perfectionistic and employees, and I just feel so bad for them. I have
Hmm.
one employee that she was a college athlete, excellent athlete. She's quite old, she's in her 40s now, but she beats herself up if she can't run faster every day than she did the day before. I mean, at some point, that's got to stop.
Wow.
You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
It's like, so that's just it's terrible. And judging herself harshly. But then what I also notice other times with perfectionistic people is when they start judging themselves because they can't take it, they push it out. Nobody works as hard as I do. I'm working harder than everybody. I do that better. Why doesn't everybody do it as well as I do? You know what I mean? And what that is really
Mhm.
just turning it inside out because they can't
Mhm.
look at
Right.
themselves and be like, I didn't do that
Right.
right, or something happened.
So there's a cost to ourselves in terms of energy. The perfectionist is polishing the rock, even though, polishing a rock, what's the point? But you're going to keep polishing it until it looks perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and you'll exhaust yourself, or you're in your 40s and you're trying to run a 2-minute mile instead of a 3-minute or a 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
You're never going to get there in your 40s, so might as well give
Right.
that one up.
Yeah.
Um, but there's also the impact on the team that you may be. This is a leadership deep dive. What's the impact on the team of the perfectionist boss?
Well, that can be devastating if you have a perfectionist boss, because that's just holding people to impossible standards.
Hmm.
Um, and it doesn't really bring out the best in anyone because
Hmm.
it's very critical all the time. And criticism,
Hmm.
in my own experience, never brings out the best in anybody. There's certainly feedback or experience sharing that is much more beneficial to people than straight up criticism. It's why I don't like annual reviews, because basically it's like a bunch of things saying, here's all the things you're doing wrong, and here's how you should
Hmm.
do it. And I'm like,
Hmm.
it doesn't feel good to anybody.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of damage to that, and it's probably a lot of it goes unspoken. Probably I
Hmm.
would imagine in teams this is not my experience because we don't have that here in my organization, but
Hmm.
that a perfectionistic leader probably has higher turnover, unhappier team members, probably not really excellent work product output, just because people are probably frightened. Certainly, there's no openness and vulnerability on a team with a perfectionistic leader. That's impossible. There's no capacity for that, and all of the things that I think that are human that make relationships and work enjoyable are
Yeah.
really completely blocked by perfection.
Yeah. Well, you're when I was introducing you at the top of the show, you're quite you're a creative person. You're doing calligraphy, for example, right? That's one of your creative outlets. So, what's the impact? And you said earlier in your description of working for a perfectionist boss is like, um, you don't even get excellence. You certainly don't get perfection because we've already established, like, well, what is it? And is it, what does that word even mean? But it has an impact on excellence. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, like how it could actually harm excellence, and your thoughts on how perfectionism might get in the way of creativity.
I think that the thing about perfection on teams is it's stultifying. It stunts everyone,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it stops creativity for sure.
Hmm.
I think the thing about perfection too, it's sort of like just vulnerability, really. It's like if it's
Hmm.
perfection, you aren't going to be real free with your ideas, right? Because people might ridicule you, people might make fun of you.
Hmm.
If you are working for a perfectionist, you're never going to think that your work is good enough. You're probably going to overthink it. It's going to be overwrought. It's not going to be, anything that is fully creative and fully expressive, no matter what you're doing, because all you're doing
Hmm.
is preparing for harsh criticism. That's hard
Hmm.
for people to take. People don't like that. It
Yeah.
doesn't bring out the best in anyone.
Yeah, I would put forward that the creative process in and of itself is imperfect.
By design. By design, because it's the whole idea of the creative process is vulnerability. All of
Mm,
that is
yeah.
vulnerability. I mean, I remember before I watched Brene Brown's TED Talk back in 2010,
Hmm.
being several things in my life that were affected by my inability to be vulnerable. I wanted to study art in college, and we did something called a critique where you had to put your artwork up on the wall. And even when
Hmm.
people said good things, it was brutal for me. I couldn't do it, I couldn't endure it. So I
Hmm.
ended up going into a different major. Um,
Hmm.
Also, when I used to go into brainstorming sessions, largely as a freelance writer many, many years ago, I would go in and I
Hmm.
always felt really unsure and I didn't really I wasn't confident in my ideas and I was afraid that they would be looked at as less than or not very good or things like that. It was a real
Hmm.
unwillingness to be vulnerable. That's why, what Brene Brown says is so true. It's like you can't get to creativity except through vulnerability. You can't do it.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
can't get to innovation. Innovation is by definition creative, which is by definition vulnerable. So
Hmm.
everything, vulnerability is the core of all that kind of creativity. You have to be willing to be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And any more these days, I tend to shy away from even right or wrong because we can get into this righteousness racket that you and I were talking about before we got on the show. Like, making yourself right and other people wrong. This is what the perfectionists can do. Can fall into the trap of you know, um, you know, making yourself right and making other people wrong, and that's a horrible racket to be running on people. So, what are your
I think
thoughts on
also what
that?
happens with the perfectionists doing things like that is they're leaving a wake of destruction behind them
Mm,
with this inability to see the effect that their behavior has on other people.
mhm,
Again, they can't look at it. There's an inability. It just
mm.
precludes any kind of introspective thought, which I think is just sad. I think that's really
Yeah.
sad. Which is
So
why I
maybe I'm
stress like better, not perfect. Like you can get
right,
better. You don't need to be
right,
perfect.
right. Um, well, yeah, perfection is really sticklers really shy away from failure and
Yeah.
right, because that by definition would not be perfect. Now,
Right.
I spent the last, well, almost 11 years. I spent 9 years chasing a black belt in jujitsu. Okay.
Mm.
And I did the quick math. By the way, folks, it's not a perfect calculation, but about 9,000 sparring rounds. Okay. Over a 9 year period. Um, I can share quite honestly that there's nobody that gets to a black belt. I don't care if it's in a martial art or whatever your equivalent of excellence is. So a black belt is just a sign of endurance, practice, sticking, perseverance, sticking with something, and tons of failure. Nobody gets to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu without failing. Like almost every day, you're training with people who are better than you are, bigger than you are, faster than you are. What you name the dimension, stronger than you are, and you're going to tap. And so, in some respects, I think excellence. I was going to ask you, but now as I'm thinking about it, I'm curious about your response to this. Excellence may be defined by how much failure you've actually gone through, and so a perfectionist can never be excellent.
I mean, I don't think you can accomplish anything without failing. I
That's been
mean,
my experience
you
in
can't
life.
learn to walk without failing. And when a little kid stumbles when they're learning to walk, you don't say, "You big dummy." They're like
Right,
learning, right? I mean, I think
right,
that's like one of my favorite books, John Maxwell's book, Failing Forward. And
right.
I say that all the time. You know, we've had a couple situations recently that were mistakes, and some of my employees were feeling bad about it. And I said, well, these were mistakes. They weren't good. They were mistakes. But
Hmm.
we all make mistakes, and as long as you don't keep making the same mistake, you learn
Hmm.
from it, then you're
Hmm.
a better person, you're a better employee, you're a better leader. It's all part of that. There is no accomplishment without failure, no true accomplishment without failure.
I love that. Well, is there anything else you want to say about this, or do you have something for the audience to try or to go away with?
Well, I would say one of the things that as I shared with you, that I think everybody does unintentionally, is we say something too quickly, we react instead of
Hmm.
respond.
Hmm.
And as I also mentioned, when I was a kid, my dad taught me that it is best to avoid behavior that requires an apology later. It's a lesson that I continue to learn, by the way. I don't think that one's ever one and done. But
Hmm.
like I said, one of the things that I practice and I teach when I speak is the practice of pause, anchor, choose. And that
Hmm.
pause is what gives you the safety net to avoid the behavior that's going to require the apology. So if you just take that pause, just take a beat, and then
Hmm.
give yourself a moment to remember who you are. That's what I always think about after. It's like, boy, if I would have taken that pause, I wouldn't have come out with that dismissive comment or that, whatever
Hmm.
that I did that apologized. So you pause, you anchor in who you are, and then you choose a better action that allows you to avoid an apology and become more like the person
Hmm.
you aspire to be.
And folks, so that's the invitation is to pause, anchor, and choose when you're feeling triggered. The pause is the biggest part of that because
Mhm.
once you're triggered, you react. It's like the tendency is to react. And so, and I would add to this, as you start to practice this, um, you'll just get better at it.
Yes, you will.
It's
It
true. That's
it
been my
grows through
experience.
practice. It grows through
Yeah,
practice. Yep.
right. So don't get too caught up if you fail at this initially, because it's well worth the effort. I believe that it's well, if you want to become more skillful in your relationships and in your interactions with other human beings, what Christy is challenging you or inviting you to try uh, will improve your relationships. I guarantee
Definitely
you.
will. Definitely
So,
will.
Christy, what's the best way people can find you if they want to reach out to you, if they when you're they want to get on your your list for your forthcoming book, what can they do? I'm not going to put some of this in the show notes, but how can they find you, reach out to you? What's the best way?
They can find me at christypretzinger.com, also
Okay.
on wgcontent.com and on LinkedIn. All of those
And
are easy places to find me.
LinkedIn. Okay, friends. Well, if you've got a bit of that streak, um, reach out to Christy. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you, and let's be on the lookout for her book. And so, Christy, let me know when that comes out so I can, share that on LinkedIn and just,
I will.
I'm yeah. What's the ETA on the book?
I don't know right now. I've got a draft of it, but I really want to
Mm,
go through and rework it. So, and
great.
I'm trying to find time to do that at the moment. So I've got a couple other things going on, so I
Okay.
haven't been able to
All
get
right.
back to it.
All right. Well, so follow you on LinkedIn, reach out to you. Thanks so much for being a guest. I love this topic. You've got some great insights, a little quick and easy. I would say maybe not so easy tool or practice to be better.
Simple, not
Not
easy.
simple, not easy. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Have a good
All right.
afternoon, David.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.